just as a reminder, this is fall planting strategies and benefits. And hopefully everybody's here because you have another great reason to love autumn aside from just Halloween. California is fortunate enough to be able to plant many months out of the year, but fall happens to be the best time. And you can learn why from our wonderful instructor, Suzanne Bontempo. So everyone's muted at this point right now. We'll pause periodically for questions. If you do have a question during the talk, you can either raise your hand or you can use the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen. And you can also use the chat. I will be checking that regularly. So if you forget and use the chat instead of the Q&A, that shouldn't be a problem. Oh, there's the raise hand icon. I forget about these animations. And there's the Q&A for those of you who weren't certain where to find those. And if you're not familiar with BOSCA, the Bay Area Water Supply Conservation Agency represents 26 agencies and water districts, cities, a water company, and a university that all purchase water wholesale from the San Francisco Regional Water System, serving 1.8 million people and 40,000 businesses in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. The goal is high quality supply of water at a fair price. For the education program, the #1 goal is that we want to encourage residents and businesses of counties BOSCA represents to really look at conservation as a primary goal. We can encourage water savings in numerous ways, and companies can do a big part commercially, but we do have a large portion, over 55% at least in Santa Clara County, of water use is used for outdoor residential. And the more that we can conserve on that front, the more we have resources to spread around. For those of you who are looking for some rebates as incentive to conserve additional water, you may have already taken part in a lawn be gone program or a lawn conversion rebate program. There are other offerings through our city forest and some other agencies, but you can actually have your landscape in some cases done for you, but in others, you can do it yourself or hire someone. But lawn be gone, you receive money, a rebate of $1 to $4 per square foot of the lawn replaced, and you'll cut your water bill way down, having beautiful drought tolerant plants that provide habitat for local wildlife, which is an amazing asset. You can also receive a $200 rebate for rain barrels for water capture. Last winter would have been a perfect time to have that one in place. If you have an older controller, some of the most cost-effective and honestly easiest programs to participate in, the most bang for your buck, is switching to a weather-based irrigation controller. So if you haven't looked into those, it's definitely worth checking out. And the rain garden rebate program, minimum requirements will be rebated up to $300. Valley Water, for those of you in Santa Clara County, offers $1 per square foot for commercial and $2 per square foot for residential as a base rate for converting lawn to drought tolerant landscaping. And in various municipalities, cost sharing can actually increase what you receive for your lawn conversion. The city of Santa Clara, for instance, is tied with a few other municipalities statewide for one of the highest rebates available. We're right now offering up to $4 per square foot for the first 1,000 square feet, and then Valley Water's base rate of $2 per square foot thereafter kicks in. And each site is subject to a lifetime cap that tops out at $5,000 for landscape rebates. Side note, we got tomato says, what the hey? And granted, tomato is a summer vegetable, but it's true for fall. If you're looking for a real way to save water in your vegetable garden, hay and straw make wonderful top dressing that actually cuts your water use sometimes more than half. So if you're planning a fall garden, as this class might inspire, keep in mind some straw or hay mulch to top off your garden. Vegetables, edible parts. South Bay Green Gardens has been around for several years now, and they offer many resources, including some great designs, landscape tips, water conservation, plant lists. So if you're not familiar with that site, I highly recommend it. And with that, I thought we had a couple slides after this, but please stay tuned after the chat. We'll have, I'm sure, many more resources that we can share for everyone that will come up during the talk. And I do see we have a few question answered right now. Can you please stop the background noises? I have the background noise. I apologize if there's interference. We'll come back to these afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so we can get started. Suzanne, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, for some reason there was a little scratchy, but hopefully there is no background noise for me. So I'd like, oh my gosh, I didn't change even the name. I'm so sorry. The first screen should say fall, fall planting. So let's just get to the second screen. So we're going to go through slides for about an hour. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon or this evening. I'm Suzanne Bontempo, and I am your presenter tonight, talking to you about fall planting. We're going to talk, I'm going to go through why the fall season is the best time to add new plants to your garden. I'm going to also share which plants are best. I'll share how to set our plants up for success. All those new plants, we want them to really succeed. And then I'm also going to go into some tips for how to hold on to rainwater once it comes to benefit our garden. So we're going to take advantage of the fall season to add plants. Though we live in this beautiful California climate that allows us to plant almost year round, fall is definitely the best time. And the reason why is because we are going to have shorter daylight hours. We are going to have cooler evening temperatures. We are going to hopefully get some rains. Hopefully the rains are going to be right around the corner. Typically we start to get rains in October. We are about 8 or so months away from the heat of next summer. So that's really important to understand. Is the reason why we plant now is that we have several months that plants can, those root zones can grow and become established before the stresses of the heat of the summer are on. And then we have about 10 months until the driest summer season is upon us. So that is really, these are the most important reasons why planting right now is so important. And when we plant now, it gives us all of that time for our plants to just become established or really get off to a great start. So for our area, for Santa Clara County, this is the monthly rainfall. Oops, sorry. So something I just like to share is this illustration shows that we are in September, and as this illustration shows is that we should start to see more precipitation. And the greatest amount of precipitation is really November through March. Something important to note, seeing that we live in a summer dry climate here in California. So how do we set our plants up for success? We are going to take advantage of that summer dry climate and choose plants that are going to be climate appropriate. So choosing native plants, both California and Mediterranean native varieties, because they are going to adapt to our summer dry climate and require less water once established. We are going to also consider grouping plants together with the similar water needs. So plants that would like low water once established will be grouped together. Plants with medium water once established will be grouped together, and so forth. We're going to provide deep watering to grow healthy roots so that once they're established, they will not need to be watered as frequently. And I will be going through all of this in a moment. We're also going to maintain healthy soils and apply mulch that Victoria was just talking about, to protect the soil and the root zones. This is going to be very important. We're going to look at how we can keep water on site by slowing that rainwater, spreading it, and sinking it and storing it when possible. And then we're going to provide regular maintenance to our garden to keep it happy and healthy. So planting climate appropriate plants, what does that mean? As I mentioned, we're always going to choose plants that can thrive in our summer dry climate. So it doesn't have to, though I favor California natives, we can also expand to Mediterranean native plants as long as they are going to be appropriate for the area of which you live, the microclimate that you might have in your garden on your property. We're always going to match the plants to the conditions of the garden to keep them from being stressed. Because what we've learned is that when plants are stressed, they're going to be more susceptible to pest problems. So when we can plant or choose plants that can adapt perfectly to our microclimate, then we will see less pest problems. And then we can also always look at choosing the varieties of plants that are going to be more pest and disease resistant. So even in the native plant world, there are varieties of certain cultivars that are going to be more pest and disease resistant. We're always going to look at planting the right plant in the right place. This is really important. It's so important for us to do our homework. When we go to the garden center, oftentimes we get very enthusiastic about all of the beautiful plants. And I myself have made a mistake by buying something on a whim and get it home. Wasn't exactly suited for the space I might have had. So it's important to understand what the plant's needs are once they're established and to match them to the conditions of the garden to keep them from being stressed and susceptible to pest problems. We're always going to match the mature size of that plant to the space that's available. Understanding that when a plant says on the tag or on the label of that plant, it might say it grows to 3 feet by 3 feet. So that means 3 feet tall by 3 feet wide in all directions. If the space we have is only 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet, that plant is going to outgrow that space. We would then offer a lot of pruning to make that plant fit in that space better. Plants, when they are, many plants, when they are over pruned or pruned frequently, that also causes stress. Not all plants are suitable for a pruned hedgerow like boxwood or privets or pittosporums. So keep that in mind. We always want to make sure that we would have at least, a little over 3 feet in all directions for that plant to grow to its mature size with ease. We want to avoid overcrowding. We always want to make sure there's significant airflow and that the plant has the space it needs to grow in a healthy fashion. And we're going to not only size, we're going to keep in mind what are all the other needs of that plant once established. Is it going to get enough sun exposure? Is it going to get shade if it requires some shade at some point of the day? Is it going to have a root zone that can compete with the other root zones of the established plants in the area? Is it going to, again, as I mentioned, receive the same amount of water as the other plants in that zone once it's established? Is it going to be compatible? So these are all things to keep in mind to have a successful garden. And then we want to look at planting correctly, which I'll review in a moment. I'd also like to invite you to consider plants that support the complex food web that surrounds us. So the habitat, even in the most urban of areas, we have beautiful habitat in the form of birds and butterflies, beneficial insects like ladybugs and so forth. And it is so important to support them by planting different varieties that can offer them pollen and nectar, and in some cases, food in the form of berries and so forth. And for those of you that like to grow food as much as I do, the fall is an excellent time to get some cool season food crops going. So what I'd like to share is that the Santa Clara County UC Master Gardeners, their website has this incredible vegetable planting chart that's specific for Santa Clara County. And as you can see, this is just a screenshot of the very top of this document. Of course, only artichokes through cilantro, but we can see already that there are many varieties of food crops that we can put in the garden right now that will thrive and grow and provide us with a lot of food through the coming months. So check that out. Some food crops that are my favorites are the alliums. So I absolutely love growing garlic. I love growing onions and shallots. I'm not sure why. It's a joy. And I will share that Halloween is my gauge to when I want to plant my garlic and my shallots. You can absolutely start onions by seeds, but you can also get onion sets or little starts at your local garden center. Bare root season is right around the corner. This is one of my favorite seasons because it's an opportunity to get a very large variety of plant material that is not potted up at a very good price. So this would be our deciduous fruit trees, our berries such as blueberries, caneberries such as these raspberries, strawberries, fruiting vines, perennial vegetables such as artichokes, asparagus, rhubarb, and so much more. Just so many plant varieties available in bare root. It's surprising. And then not just plant variety, food crops, we also could see a lot of our ornamentals, such as our ornamental trees and shrubs, vines, roses. This is a great opportunity to visit our garden centers to see what is available that you might want to add during the dormant season. Spring bulbs. We're looking at spring blooming bulbs. This is the time to pick those up. Some of these bulbs might need to have a bit of time in the cooler, the cooling drawer of your refrigerator, such as tulips. They do require some chill hours, more chill hours than our Bay Area would offer. It would be fine if we got snow, but where we live right now, we don't get snow yet, thankfully. So we're going to look at picking up our spring blooming bulbs and seeing which ones would be ideal for our gardens, keeping in mind that some, such as daffodils, are not attractive to deer. So if you have an area that gets a lot of deer, daffodils will be your ticket. They will also naturalize. So I'm a huge fan of daffodils and I love seeing them in the spring. And this is also a great time to consider replacing that lawn. So through all of the resources that Victoria mentioned at the beginning that I know you can find on the Bosco website, Valley Water website, and Santa Clara County websites, you'll see information on replacing that Lawn Be Gone program. And what a wonderful opportunity. There are so many fantastic lawn replacements. These are just my top four that I could just think of that I know is readily available, that will fill in really nicely and that will offer something a little different. So such as the red fescue and the meadow grass, the carex, those both are going to look more like a turf. So if you really like that lawn look, these would be excellent turf replacements. I like to say my most favorite ground cover Diamondia, but then it's also Creeping Time. I can't choose. Both of them are stunning. Both of them have their, appeal. One has a silvery look and it has these beautiful yellow kind of daisy-like flowers during the summer months. And then the Creeping Time is also flat and it has these little purple flowers that is a pollinator haven. And again, during the summer months. So just really great choices, but understand there is a whole list of resources about replacing your lawn on those websites. And here are just a few websites that I was mentioning. So the Bosqua, BayAreaGardening.org will have a list of plants that are going to be appropriate for our summer dry climate, and that would be regionally appropriate for the Santa Clara County area. Also, our local California Native Plant Society, the Santa Clara County chapter, and then also just their general statewide database of plants, which is Calscapes or Bloom California. It's pretty fun to go through and to plug in the types of plants you're looking for according to your zip code, and then what type of habitat those plants attract. It's really neat. And then, of course, our local Santa Clara County Master Gardeners has so many great resources on their website. And if you're looking for some plants that can thrive in the most extreme conditions, it's the Arboretum All-Stars through the UC Davis Arboretum. They have this incredible database of really hardy plants that can thrive in high winds, full sun exposure, with the minimum of watering. Okay. So check that out. It's pretty fun. More plants than you would imagine. And then, of course, visiting our local garden centers. They are going to provide you with a wealth of information and also plants that are going to thrive directly in our area. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to plant and how to water, because these are two things that many of us, I think, take for granted or maybe are not aware that this is where things can really go sideways and set us up for not the success we're looking for. So when we buy a plant, it is not unusual that that plant, we're going to take for the example this 4-inch perennial in the top left corner, we remove the pot from that plant and the root zone and soil is in the same shape. I think we've all seen this, right? So we take that handy dandy plant tag that came with that plant, or we could take our pruning shears closed, and we're going to score the sides and the bottom to open up that root zone ever so slightly, because we want to achieve what is in this illustration on the right. We want to have roots growing out and down in this loose fashion that's very healthy. So the bottom left illustration has a picture of a root ball that's planted on solid ground, but we've dug the soil around the sides. We have backfilled with a combination of compost or soil amendment with our native soil. And if you can tell, that root ball or the crown of that plant where the trunk meets that root ball, or where the trunk meets kind of the what looks like a pot, that area is ever so slightly above the regular grade of your soil. And the reason why is when we put mulch on top of that soil to protect the root zone, we want it to ever so slightly slant or fall away from that crown, because we do not want soil or leaf debris or mulch to settle around the crown of that plant. So just something to keep in mind. It's very subtle. We're not doing a big exaggerated, unless you have to mound the area due to clay or some other obstacle. And if we are buying bare root fruit trees, roses, perennials, or what have you, this is something that is a little tricky. So we actually, when we buy the plant, sometimes it will receive it as we see this rose in this picture, literally bare root. Or sometimes when we're purchasing these plants, they're in a maybe like peat moss or coconut coir or similar. And so we would have to remove that medium so that we can actually see the roots. We then will dig our hole, make a soil cone, as in the illustration on the right. That crown of the plant, which is very difficult to identify, needs to be at the soil level. But I'm going to say ever so slightly a wee bit higher so that we can account for that mulch layer that we are going to then place. We're going to backfill with that soil that's been amended with compost. But something that I'd like to share is that this is not unusual, but oftentimes folks get the root graft union confused and think that that is where we should be planting. So that red arrow is pointing right at where the graft union is, where the top of the plant got grafted onto the root stock, and that definitely needs to be exposed and not buried. We need to identify the crown. The crown is where the trunk and the roots meet. So I hope that makes sense. If you're ever in doubt or question, you can absolutely reach out to your local garden center to ask a professional nursery person. And my contact information is at the end of this program. You're always welcome to send me a photograph and I can help you identify. But it is not easy, so that's why I'm bringing this up. And then we want to grow deep root systems, and we do that with water. Roots are only going to go where the water goes. So it is really important that when we plant new plants, we're always going to provide them with deep water. And we're not watering again until the top couple of inches has dried. We're going to focus that water at that drip line. So when we have a plant that's young, or in the case of that 4-inch pot, the root zone was only 4 inches wide. So I'm going to focus the water at that edge of that 4 inches, 2 inches all the way around as the radius from the center of the plant. As the plant grows, I'm going to drive the roots out by focusing the water further out. I'm going to also drive the roots down by providing water, more volume of water. I'll water longer as the plants mature so I can have deeper roots. As I water more volume of water, or I'm watering for a longer amount of time, now I'm going to take more time between my watering cycles. So I might let the soil dry at about 3 inches before I water next. When we water shallowly, we grow shallow roots and they dry out quickly. We happen to have this shallow rooted plant that's been in our garden for several years. And we happen to get some hot spells during the summer. That water evaporates out. The root zone is thirsty and it is dehydrated and it becomes stressed until it gets watered again. That cycle of having that plant dry out will cause stress over time. That plant might see more pest problems, but it's also going to reduce its lifespan. When we can water deeply, we are growing a healthier plant. And again, we're always watering at the outer edges of the canopy or on the outer edge of the edges of the plant material, so to speak. The top right picture shows these little fibrous root hairs. That's where we're going to irrigate around where the blue line is. We're also going to focus our fertilizer in that area as well. So I mentioned we're going to be grouping plants together with similar water needs. This is really important. So if I have an established garden that requires no water once established, and I add a plant to that area, I'm not adjusting my irrigation to accommodate the new plant. I'm leaving the irrigation set for that entire zone, but I then will be hand watering that new plant until it becomes established. I'm also going to look at matching those plants to other microclimate needs, as I mentioned before. So plants that like full sun will all get planted together in the same zone, as long as they're all getting full sun. Plants that need some shade will get planted in the shady areas. Plants that plants that need to be protected from the wind will get planted in the areas that they can be protected. Plants that can handle heat, maybe against the side of a house or garage or other structure that might be south facing, we're going to plant plants that can handle that heat in that area. So this is all something to consider when we're adding plants to our garden. A little bit more homework is usually needed. And then we're going to build healthy soil. And we do this by adding compost. Compost, when we go to the garden center, could be called soil amendment or planting mix or soil builder, or it might be called compost. It's really important to read the bag or the bale. You can read the ingredients that's in the compost, what made that compost, they'll be listed. So it's really nice to understand what we're bringing home. We're going to mix that compost into our existing soil, or we're going to top dress around that drip line of the plants, around that canopy edge, where those fibrous root zones are, where we focus the water. We're going to focus the compost in that area so it can get integrated into the soil. We can also make a compost tea or purchase compost tea at a place like Linkso. But the reason why we add compost to the soil is because it improves that soil structure and it increases that water holding capacity. It's a win-win. So if we have sandy soil or clay or anything in between, when we add compost to the soil, it is going to increase the health of that soil because we're adding important microbiology. That microbiology has a symbiotic relationship with the root zones of the plants, allowing those plants to take up nutrients and water with more ease on an as-need basis. But also, when we add compost to the soil and we can grow healthy soil, we're growing healthier plants that are going to be more resilient to pest problems. And we're going to be reducing the amount of pesticides we need to use because of this resiliency, because these plants are healthier and are going to be less prone to diseases and insect pests. So it's pretty cool. We're going to feed with organic fertilizers. And the reason why is because these are going to be a more sustainable way to feed our plants. We're actually feeding the microbiology in that soil that then can make the nutrients readily available to each of those unique plants that you have in your garden so that plants can take up that nutrients on an as-need basis. We are actually feeding less often when we feed with organics. It ends up being less expensive. Oftentimes you'll notice on the bag, the bottle, or the box, we're going to see lower NPK numbers. That is the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium. I think I got that right. And then we're also going to see that organic fertilizers contain micronutrients. And as I mentioned, they are going to slowly feed your plants so the plants can grow in a more natural, sustainable way. So these are those numbers. We're looking at the NPK, which is the nitrogen, the potassium, and the phosphorus. So no, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. I had it right the first time. I am so sorry. I was looking at the bag on the left and I read those backwards. But yes, this little, the box on the lower right, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So organic fertilizers are loaded with micronutrients and macronutrients. So our macronutrients are going to be nutrients that maybe we're very well aware of. A lot of us are familiar with nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, but it also includes the sulfur, calcium, magnesium, but some of those micronutrients that are going to be equally as important in smaller quantities, which is the iron, the zinc, the copper, and so forth. But something to keep in mind, the way I like to think of these numbers, because you might forget what they stand for, but the important part is the nitrogen is going to grow a greener plant, a healthier, greener above ground parts. So that's why oftentimes people that have lawns, they want to go for that high nitrogen push. Numbers don't have to be high. Oftentimes with organic fertilizers, 10 is the highest number, but you can think nitrogen is above ground. Phosphorus, we're going to think about that number is going to support what is happening around the root zone. It's going to reach down to help grow healthy roots that also help set buds for more bloom production. So the middle number there is really important to me when I'm growing food crops that I want a lot of flowers, okay, such as tomatoes or zucchini or other summer squash, just for example. So you could think of the phosphorus as growing healthy roots and also helping with more flower production. And then the potassium, you can think of kind of all around. It promotes all around healthy growth. So that's why I like thinking of this, the NPK, as up, down, and all around. And then mulch. So mulch is any material spread over a soil surface that it covers. I like to think of it as a protective layer or like a blanket that I'm putting over the root zone of my plants. For me, I like to think of something organic, such as organic wood material that's laid on the surface of the soil beyond the zone 1 in accordance to CAL FIRE for fire recommendations. But what I like to really focus on is anything that's organic material that will break down over time, such as bark, wood chips, anything that maybe the arborist is putting through the wood chipper, even the leaves that are going to start falling right now from some of the deciduous trees. That's Mother Nature's mulch. Those leaves are really important to stay on the ground if possible. Of course, we want to rake it off or sweep it from a patio or a walkway. But if we can keep it around the drip line of that plant, well, there you go. It's free mulch. Lawn clippings are also an excellent mulch. Straw is one of my favorites, especially around seedlings like vegetable starts. Newspaper can also be a mulch. Things I'd like to avoid would be oyster shells or gravel. Those are going to actually hold and lock in a lot of heat and make the soil, the root zone under there not cool off well enough. And really hold on to that heat into the evening hours. Landscape fabric, there are some disadvantages to landscape fabric. It doesn't allow the soil to breathe as well. We would recommend working with cardboard and offering a practice of sheet mulching as opposed to the landscape fabric that is like a synthetic petroleum product. And then rubber is another product that we wouldn't recommend unless you have a child's play area that requires that rubber as for protection. The reason why mulch is so important is because it really does protect that root zone. But something to understand is that soil, without a nice layer of mulch protecting it, soil, when it is dry, it becomes hydrophobic and it prevents water from penetrating or infiltrating into that soil. So if we were to get rain or if we were to water with a sprinkler or with like hand water with the hose, that water would bead off and flow to the side, literally run right off. And it would take a few minutes before that water were to absorb, kind of like a hard kitchen sponge. It takes a minute for the water to absorb into the center of that sponge. Well, soil is exactly the same. But if we have a nice 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch on top of that soil, protecting it, then when it does rain, or if we were to water with a hose by hand or with a sprinkler, that water is going to absorb right into that soil. It's beautiful. When we have that 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch on top of that soil protecting it, we're also reducing the evaporation rate of that water significantly. So we're looking at reducing the frequency of watering from anywhere of 20 to 70%, depending on uh, the, the soil, the type of plant material, and the microclimates of your garden. The mulch also over time is going to break down and add food to the biology around that soil. So there are so many benefits, and it prevents weed seeds from germinating and provides habitat for beneficial insects, just so many benefits. But something we want to keep in mind is we do not want the mulch around the base of that plant. That crown of the plant that I keep mentioning wants to be free of mulch and leaf debris. And for those of us that like to grow food, but we're just not into growing winter crops, please do yourself a favor. Do not leave that soil bare. Plant some cover crops. They are very inexpensive. They grow extremely well without a lot of effort, and they really protect that soil. They continue to feed the microbiology, and they continue to help grow healthy soil by replenishing nitrogen. It's almost like free fertilizer for your plants. They will flower, so they'll attract a lot of beneficial insects. Oftentimes, some of the cover crops are food, such as the fava beans. So I love growing fava beans because I get to trim and harvest the fava bean leafy tips and chop those up as a saute, or in time the beans themselves will grow, and that's another food, type of food. But overall, cover crops are going to improve your soil structure and increase your water holding capacity. So again, very inexpensive way to continue to build healthy soil and save water. And then for fall maintenance around the garden, it is really important for us to pick up any fallen food crops such as apples or citrus or, you know, plums, cherries, raspberries, whatever we're growing in the garden. And if it's our summer food crops like our summer squash and our tomatoes, it's really important to harvest all that food and to keep the overall garden as free of food as possible. And the reason why, if we've got a lot of food that's ripe hanging around, we're going to attract pests. We're going to be feeding those yellow jackets. We're going to be feeding those rats and mice. We're also going to be attracting deer, raccoons, and so forth. So it's just really important to clean up our food crops and harvest the food and get the food that we're not eating either into the green waste bin or into a home compost system. We're going to pick up any diseased leaves, such as leaves that have had black spot or rust or powdery mildew, things like that. Any diseased leaves, it's really important to get into the municipal green waste bin. Do not put those in your home compost. Unfortunately, our home compost systems do not heat up enough to kill those pathogens, so it's just nice to get them off site. We are going to selectively prune, which means opening up canopies to get more airflow, but we want to be really mindful that we've inspected those shrubs or trees to make sure there's no nests that we might be pruning out by accident. And remember, when we're pruning, less is more. If we do a big cut, we can't put it back. So it's always nice to just go slowly and gradually until you get to a place that it's going to be appropriate for you and the plant you're pruning. We're going to fertilize with organic fertilizers. And this time of year, it's still September. We could still fertilize our citrus and our roses and our other food crops and so forth. But pretty much as we move into October and into November, we're going to really look at lower nitrogen fertilizers because we don't want a lot of above ground growth. We're going to start to cool down, and frost could occur in the coming months, come January, February. So we really want to slow the natural growth of the plants, and we do not want to encourage a lot of a stimulation of new growth. So we're going to, after September, if we're going to continue to feed, we're going to look at lower nitrogen fertilizers. And we'll plant cover crops to protect soil in those garden beds. Our irrigation systems. So our irrigation systems are still on for those of us that have them. I know some of us might still be hand watering, but for us, irrigation systems are common and popular. These are not set it and forget it systems. It's really important to adjust them with the new seasons. And new seasons are going to be those that are really dictated by the daylight hours. So when we have longer daylight hours, that's more time for water evaporation from that soil. And then when we have shorter daylight hours, the water does not evaporate as quickly. So the soil around those root zones stays moist for a longer period of time. So if we haven't already started to, it's important to start to consider adjusting those irrigation systems for the new season. Of course, take advantage of the smart controller, and then you won't have to do as much. You just have to program it to for the needs of your garden, and then the smart controller will do all the work for you. But the best time to set your irrigation system is really those sunrise hours from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. You can even push it to 7 a.m., but we want to water early in the morning when the soil temperatures and the air temperatures are still cool. We want to avoid watering in the middle of the night for a couple of reasons. One, when we're watering in the middle of the night, we happen to see more fungal issues come up. We'll see more black spot, more rust because there's more moisture. But another pest problem we see is critters. Critters see that water. The summer is dry. They're getting desperate. So they're going to be cruising around the garden looking for places to access water. So it's not unusual for a raccoon to chew the end of an emitter to access that water. We're always going to inspect our irrigation systems for leaks. It's just nice to go out about once a month or, just to make sure everything's working appropriately. And whenever possible, if we've got pop-up sprinklers, it's nice to convert them to drip irrigation. Although I am learning that there are pop-up sprinklers that are now on the market that are going to be more water wise. So either way, look at converting older irrigation systems to more modern systems that are going to be more water effective. You'd certainly learn more about watering efficiently and effectively, and more about irrigation systems through Valley Water and the Bosco websites. And this is what I mean. I just had a break in my garden the other day, so I was very surprised. But it's really important to address irrigation breaks, inspect our irrigation, because a broken sprinkler head or, a crack or an emitter that popped off, we could be wasting as much as 25,000 gallons of water. I mean, this is just one fact I read. It's a lot of water that we're wasting, and it could cost you a lot of money. And I think $150 a month is very modest amount. I think that price has gone up, but pay attention, get out there and inspect, because not only is it going to cost us money, but it's also going to make our plants suffer, which is really the focus here, right? So here is a little some images of converting pop-ups to drip. It's very simple, but again, look for those rain harvesting, lawn begone, and other irrigation efficiency rebates before you get started. There is money on the table for you, but oftentimes there's an application process that needs to get approved before you start the conversions. So now I'm going to take the last few minutes by talking about keeping rainwater on site. So you might hear this campaign that many of the water agencies have, which is slow it, spread it, sink it, store it. So we want to slow that runoff. So runoff is any water that is not absorbed into the ground and is moving across our property or our yards. So we want to slow that runoff. We want to spread it out across our garden into planters or planted areas and over other pervious surfaces. We really want that water to spread out And then we want it to sink back in the ground. Okay, this is optimum. So this is going to increase the health of the soil. It's going to recharge deeply rooted trees and shrubs. It's going to recharge the aquifers, the groundwater, and so forth. And then we also want to look at storing it for the future whenever possible. We want to prevent runoff. So boy, this last winter, we certainly saw a lot of runoff. We saw a lot of overflow, but we want to reduce the overflow into those storm drains, because when we have too much water flowing into the storm drains, there can be some overflow issues. They can get clogged and so forth, and that's where we start to see flooding around the curbs and so forth, and the street levels. We also want to prevent runoff because runoff is going to bring pollutants with it from our property. So whenever we use any synthetic fertilizers or synthetic pesticides around the property, or any type of chemicals around our property, understand there's residuals that are going to linger. And when we have runoff, it's going to move in with that water to contaminate our waterways. We want to prevent mulch or soil or any debris from moving with that water, because it can clog those storm drains. So if we have fresh mulch on our property and we get a big rainstorm, boy, we got to be really careful that that rain isn't washing that mulch down the drain. All of this water, when we can keep it on site, is going to keep our garden happy and healthy. We also want to increase those permeable surfaces. So if you have a landscape project in your future, consider, instead of concrete or mortar laid, hard laid landscape walkways and patios and paths, consider decomposed granite or gravel or dried laid patio material, anything that will allow water to infiltrate so it can percolate down into the soil to continue to access those root zones that are going to be underneath those paths. And this is really fun. Consider planting a rain garden or a seasonal creek. So rain gardens are going to be planted with native plants that thrive in winter wet conditions and in summer dry conditions. These rain gardens just look like another section of the garden that is beautifully planted, but is ever so slightly has a divot, almost like a basin, a very shallow basin. It's never any deeper than like 6, 8 inches tops, but it can take on any overflow that might be coming down the rain gutter or overflow from a rain barrel or cisterns. Or we can strategically put some rain gardens as almost like a swath along, like maybe a hedgerow of shrubs or near trees, so that can capture that water, slow that water so it can sink in for some of the deeper rooted plant material on our property. Plants that are going to be appropriate for rain gardens, as I mentioned, would be, this is just a very short list, just 9 California natives that would thrive. So many California natives that will thrive in summer dry and winter wet conditions that would just look beautiful. So look into it. It's kind of fun. And then we want to capture rainwater whenever possible. So this is one of my colleagues on the top left. She's quite proud of her cisterns. Of course, this was many years, one at a time, over time, seeing that she could really utilize all that water for her native garden. But when we can capture rainwater, 1 inch of rain over 1,000 square foot surface can flow and gather up to, well, over 600 gallons of water. It's about 625 gallons, actually. That's a lot of water. So this is all water that's going to be our insurance to water our gardens through the summer months without even tapping into the municipal waterways. So this is an incredible way to capture water and to use it to water our gardens in a way that's going to be sustainable, free. The water is free. We just have to place the infrastructure to capture the water, but it's pretty great. And then, of course, because pest problems are inevitable, these are some online resources that I'd like to share with you. The Our Water, Our World website has a short list of some pest problems, easy to read handouts that will guide us for sustainable and eco-friendly pest management. Our Water, Our World does partner with the University of California, the statewide IPM program. And if you can't find the pest that you're interested in on the OWL website, you can go to the UCIPM website and you can certainly find it there. UCIPM has this very in-depth database that's searchable that will really encompass any pest or any garden situation you might be looking for. So I encourage you to have a look at that. And if you happen to have a bug in your garden, a insect, and you're not sure if it's a pest or a pal, you can always take a picture of it and reference the bugguide.net. You send them, you email them the picture, and they can identify that for you because pest identification is key. If we can't identify the pest, can't solve that problem. And if you happen to have some pesticides that you're curious to learn more about how the active ingredients work, what their mode of action is, and how they're impacting the environment, the National Pesticide Information Center is a really wonderful website that's extremely neutral and just shares the facts. So I'd like to thank you for joining us. I'd like to finish with your questions. And I'd like to say, so far, so good. No technical problems.
I'm really pleased, given the issues that we were having at the beginning. I was a little
Oh my
confused,
gosh.
but it's gone very well.
Oh my gosh. I'm so grateful. Yes, we had several drops before. So I am very grateful. Thank you. And thank you everyone for sticking with us and being so patient. Both of our cameras are off just to reduce the impact of the Wi-Fi. But yes, let's answer some questions.
I've been answering some in the chat
Oh,
that I
beautiful.
but there are a few that I wanted to reserve for you.
Beautiful.
The first is, with climate change, should we be changing our grow zone reference area to account for the hotter climate?
Oh, what a beautiful question. Not at the moment, but it is important to understand how the temperatures or the overall temperature band or the range is still, we're still getting the baseline chill hours and the baseline, heat averages. But what we're seeing now are periods of extreme heat or periods of extreme wet, or maybe even periods of extreme cold. Remember, we did get some snow last year, and that's what we want to focus on. So there are things to keep in mind. We want to make sure we have shade cloth available, 30 or 40% shade cloth to set up and to tent over our plants to provide shade during those periods of extreme heat. For you all, really, if it's long periods of over 95 degrees or into those triple digits where we have heat waves, even though our plants might be full sun plants, our California sun is very hot and it can burn plant material. So that's why being ready to put up some shade cloth. During extreme cold, we want to be ready to have frost blankets ready, to cover and protect our plants. Some plants might not be acclimated for some extreme cold if those frosts are unusual for your area. And then for the extreme rain, last year, hopefully you got to notice if there was any pooling or flooding on your property. If there was, then that's your opportunity before the rains start again to increase the drainage in those areas. Perhaps install a French drain or something similar so that you can have some water flow in directions that you want it to flow and not pool in areas you don't want it to pool. So that's what we're looking at.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question that says, I have trouble with direct seeding. It does not sprout. Any tips?
Yeah, oh my gosh, I understand. So direct seeding can be challenging. It really depends on the seed. So I'm going to share my experience with carrot seeds because I, for years, tried to direct sow and I never had success. But then I learned some tips. So one thing is what we're only going to bury the seed or plant the seed, the depth of the profile of that seed. So carrot seeds are very thin. They're very tiny. I'm barely pressing it into the top of the soil. Same with lettuce seeds, barely pressing it into the top of the soil. The next thing is once we start to water the seeds, and when they're little, we might just be misting them with a spray bottle. You know, we're not really going too crazy with the hose because sometimes the power of the or the force of the water coming out of the hose, the sprinkler, is too strong. It'll actually move those seeds out of the way, relocating them to where we don't want them or burying them too deeply. But once we start watering, we need to make sure that those seeds are staying evenly moist and they're only drying out slightly between watering. So what I've started to do is I actually put some row cover directly over, like have it tented directly over my seeds so that they can get some protection. That water won't evaporate as quickly. It'll lock in some heat so that that heat can be captured to regulate those temperatures. It's almost like I'm creating a mini greenhouse. And then I'm watering more frequently. You might have drip irrigation, and that's fine. You want to have the frequency come on enough that that soil can dry out between watering, but then it can come back on before those seeds or that area gets bone dry for too long. But you want to make sure that drip is going to provide watering in an even fashion. So there's a really great book called the Golden Gate Gardener or Golden Gate Garden by Pam Pierce. She actually has a new edition that just launched this year. It is gardening, so many wonderful gardening tips for the greater Bay Area. So though a lot of her focus is San Francisco, she goes on to the East Bay and the South Bay and the North Bay. Those sections are also in the book, and it's all extremely easy to read, practical information. So she talks about germinating seeds, and it is probably one of the best publications for growing in our area. I mean, I've got it in my library among some other books, but it is a book I reference regularly. So it's The Golden Gate Gardener by Pam Pierce.
Excellent. And I just put that title and the author's last name in the chat.
Thank you.
Missed it.
Thank you.
Here we go. And our last question, well, actually we have two. The last garden question is, I have some old rock liner from a pond giving me very shallow soil in some areas. What should I do if I want to successfully plant where I don't have much depth to dig?
Okay, so you'll want to remove as much rock material as possible. And if you've got an area of soil that is just really challenging, it's hard packed, one of the tricks I've learned is sheet mulching. So when we put the practice, and you might even, sheet mulching is the layer of cardboard with or without compost, but always with at least 2 to 3 inches of mulch on top of that cardboard. So I encourage you to look into what sheet mulching is. I know there's a lot of local resources for sheet mulching, but I would start with a layer, like a 1-inch layer of compost. I would put 2 or 3 layers of cardboard overlapped, and then I would put 3 to 4 inches of mulch, some type of wood, like arbor mulch or wood chips on top. You water it once just to hydrate that cardboard, and then you just let the microbiology work its magic. It will, over time, about 6 to 9 months, and definitely in about a year, within a year, you'll have beautiful, workable soil that you can absolutely dig into. So that's something I would encourage you to try. It's kind of this magic trick for really crummy soils and how to revise them or regenerate those areas.
Sheet mulching, it works wonders.
It does. And then something else as a side note, you can also look at getting some cover crops that have deep root zones. So like the radishes, like daikon, things like that. There are cover crops that actually are designed to, they have root zones that really can break up harder compact soils. So you can look into that to see what cover crops might be best for your situation.
And then our last question, I think, unless somebody else chimes in, um, are you going to be making the slides available to the attendees?
Oh, I typically don't because it is recorded. So you can reference the program with the recorded webinar. If you have any specific questions or any specific requests, please don't hesitate to email me. I'd be happy to accommodate. But typically, the slideshow is available because it's a recorded program.
Great. Okay, I don't see anybody else chiming in. So if we've addressed everyone's questions, I just wanted to thank you again all for attending. And Suzanne, that was an awesome presentation. Thank you again.
Thank you. Oh, thank
Learned
you so
from
much for,
always.
yeah, Victoria, thank you again for your patience and for assisting. This is just, yeah, I just really appreciate your assistance with all of this great facilitation and all.
No, well, thank you. I just got a indication that someone has a hand up. I'm trying
Sure.
to, where is the hand? There it is. Okay. Alicia, I think you are unmuted, I believe.
Hello.
Hi,
Yes.
Alicia.
Hi. So I'm a teacher and we're trying to start a garden at our school. And so I was wondering if there are any resources for school gardens that you know of.
Yes. Believe it or not, well, I'm sure there's more than what I know of, but the Brooklyn Botanical Garden has a series of publications for gardening with children, school gardens, and so forth. So you might do an online search for, gardening with children, Brooklyn Botanical Garden publication to start. The
Okay.
Pam Pierce book that I mentioned, Golden Gate Gardener, is also will have some really great guidelines just to get started. And I would imagine that there is some really great information online, especially if you do a web search like Alice Waters and School Gardens, just because and I believe she even has a publication because she was kind of the celebrity that started the school gardens in Berkeley, right? So that would be where I would start. However, I absolutely know that there's more resources out there. I just right now I can't think of them at the moment, so I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you. I'll start with those.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Sorry, we did have a follow-up question to elaborate on how do you deep water?
Oh, deep watering. So we deep water by either having our irrigation or having like a soaker hose, and we have it on for a very long time. So a very long time means we have our irrigation. First, we want to understand what is the flow rate of that irrigation? How is it 1 gallon per hour, 2 gallon per hour, so forth. So we want to always gauge that water and get it down depending on the root zone and how mature that plant is or how established that plant is. We want to always gauge the water to get it down like 6 to 8 inches if it's perennials, 8 inches to 10 inches if it's like a medium small shrub, about 12 inches if it's a larger shrub or tree, and very mature trees with deep root zones might even need deeper water. So what we're going to do is we're putting our irrigation on our perennial bed, and we have it on for, let's say, 30 minutes. But after that 30 minutes, we actually need to go with our trowel or with a little shovel and see how deep did that water get? Did it get down at least 4, 5, 6 inches? If it did not, then we need to have that irrigation time run for longer. So maybe it needs to run for instead of 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, maybe 60 minutes. And then we want to let that soil, the top couple of inches, dry out before that cycle goes on again. If we're using a hose, we're going to put the hose at the edge of that plant, that drip line, remember, or the outer edge of the roots. It'll be in one point. We're going to turn the hose on and then turn it down as low as we can till where a very slow stream of water is coming out. Very, very slow, almost before we turn off the hose. After a period of time, we would move that hose to another section. So let's just say, so that we could go all the way around the circumference of the drip line of that plant. So we could provide deep, even watering all the way around. And that could take a little bit of time. So you are the experts of how water moves through your soil. And only you can be the one that can identify for how long water needs to be on, that irrigation needs to be on to provide deep watering. And then only you can identify when you need to water your plants again. It's very tricky.
We did have another watering follow-up question. The person asks, earlier in the presentation, you said dry soil is hydrophobic. Why do we let the top layer of the soil dry out then? Won't that cause runoff?
Okay, we're assuming there's a nice 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch on top of that soil. When we have 2 to 3 inches of mulch on top of the soil, we need that soil to dry out a few inches, or the root zone of these plants are going to rot. Especially plants that would require less water once established. They want the root zones to dry out. Oftentimes, what I found is that the average person is unaware and will just water like 3 times a week. They'll set the irrigation system 3 times a week for 15 minutes. That's got to be enough, correct? But if we start to look at this a little more closely, we see, oh, I've got a 1 gallon per hour emitter. It's for 15 minutes. That means it's a quart of water coming out. Is that enough to actually grow deep roots? Is it actually getting deep enough? No, it's probably only getting 2 inches down. So I can share that I have some programs, and I know I've done them even with Bosqua, so you can look on the YouTube channel to look at any of my WaterWise videos, or I should say my recordings of the webinars. This is sometimes a topic that I will speak about only watering for an entire hour. It is a little bit more complicated, but if we can look at books like the Pam Pierce book or the Sunset Western Garden book, there are some instructions on how to water. And even going to, local garden centers to, asking them, or feel free to email me and I can get you, I can email you some resources where to look. But watering is one of the most difficult things for us because we don't see what's going on underground.
And there's a follow-up to that question that says, do the irrigation systems flow slowly enough for that very slow drip that you described for deep watering?
Irrigation systems are designed exactly to deliver water at a slow rate. Absolutely. That is why drip irrigation is a superior way, a very healthy way, a very efficient and effective way to water by saving water. We're using less water. Big picture, we're using less water when we can water effectively and efficiently with drip, because we're getting the water exactly where we want it to go. We're able to slowly let that water trickle down deeply. And then we're able to set that irrigation controller to not come on again until that top few inches of the soil has dried out.
And just to be extra specific, we generally want all irrigation emitters to be below the mulch, correct?
That's right. We want it always to be below the mulch. And that's also going to reduce the critters from chewing on it. but there's no guarantee, but it will reduce the critters.
They can't see it, they're less attracted sometimes.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that was the end of our questions. So with that, I think we're gonna call it a night if you're ready, Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, thank you everyone who's still sticking around. I appreciate everyone's questions. I appreciate everyone's attention, and Victoria, I especially appreciate you. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
You all as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.